Very powerful. I'm going to go right to Vince D'Acchioli because we're already 8:30 or so. So Vince, you're up. Take it away.
Wow. Well, thank you, Graham, for messing up everything I really wanted to say. You know, there's a lot of things in life that I can consider. Losing a child is not one of them. But someone said once that trials in life do not make a man; they reveal him. And you need to know that I don't know you, but I'm very proud of what has been revealed in you. And I just want you to know that your daughter is living on with what God is doing in and through you. And just a powerful story, and it's just an amazing message. And I released an article a few days ago called Dark Saturday and the Pandemic. And it kind of gets into what Graham was talking about in the early part of his delivery about what are we learning in the midst of this struggle. The Dark Saturday is the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter. And I can only imagine what the disciples felt during that dark day. It must have seemed like a long time. Something of the old had died. They were uncertain about their future. And during this pandemic, I think a lot of us are in that particular place. But I don't believe God wastes a good old strategy or a good old tragedy, I should say, without trying to teach us something. So I wrote, there was a message that came out of me back in 2009. The title of it is Armed, ... Ready for Battle. And if you want to see that message, our website is OTM for On Target Ministries, OTM.co. You can go there in the video section. I think that one was a message I did at, I think, one of the largest churches in Vegas back in 2009. But here's an excerpt from that particular message that I kind of feel compelled to share after hearing what Graham just said. My encouragement to all of us is similar to what Graham is. Don't let this opportunity right now that we're in the midst of be wasted. The prayer that I would recommend all of us pray is, Lord, in the midst of this struggle, don't let me miss the lesson that you're trying to teach me. Now, back in 2009, my wife is in the hospital. She's been in the hospital for 4.5 months, being kept alive by machines, and most of the time in a coma. She contracted what they call H1N1 double pneumonia. Very similar to what's happening today. She was on a ventilator, and on Super Bowl Sunday 2010, the doctors came and brought me into a little room, showed me all the evidence, all the CT scans, all the x-rays, said your wife is not going to make it. And there was zero chance for survival. And needless to say, they didn't know what they were talking about. They knew what they were talking about medically, but God had a different idea. She's a miracle. And 6 weeks after they sent her home to die, she was home, no telemetry, nothing. She was 100% healed. But in the midst of that struggle, the times when I would drive back and forth to the hospital, I would speak with God. I was devastated emotionally. I was in a place that was just a really scary place. And sometimes, guys, we have to be in that vulnerable place before we can really sense God's presence. And that's what happened with me. On this one occasion, when I was driving to the hospital, I said, I was praying, and I really know I heard the Lord speak to me, because he said something I would have never thought of. He said, Vince, I know you're praying for Cindy, but I want you, sir, to start praying that you don't miss what I'm trying to teach you in the midst of this struggle. And I thought, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. I'm thinking about my wife. Okay, so I prayed, Lord, I don't want to miss it. The next day, at 2 a.m, I get a call from the hospital saying, Mr. D'Acchioli, you need to come. Your wife is probably not going to make it through the night. She's developed blood clots in her lungs, which is preventing air from getting into her lower chamber, and she is about to suffocate to death. I drove to the hospital, got there, went into this little ICU room. They didn't even have time to take her out of the room. They closed the curtain. There was a woman doctor who was a specialist that was there attending to her, and about 3 or 4 other people. And there was the TV monitor And they were all working on her, and they let me stay. They put a little mask on me, and I'm watching all of this. And I don't remember the doctor's name, but I affectionately refer to her now as Dr. Grabber. Dr. Grabber went into her trach with a wire with a little camera on the end and a little clamp, and they would go down and they would look for blood clots, and they would show up on the screen. They go down to grab a blood clot, and I'm watching all of this, and they grab a little clot, and they start to pull on it, and a little tiny chunk would break off, and all the people in the room would go, oh, almost had that one. And then she'd go down again, and then she'd find another one, and then all of a sudden a big old chunk would come out, and everybody in the room would go, wow, did you see that? And I'm standing there hyperventilating. I don't know what's going to happen to my wife. She went in 31 times. And then finally, after 31 times, I watched her. She pulled her mask down. She had a big smile on her face, and she says, she's clear. And all of the people in the room applauded. But they were applauding and booing in direct proportion to the size of the clots that were coming out of her. So I'm driving home after that experience. And on the way home, Lord, I really believe the Lord in those days lived in the backseat of my Avalanche. I mean, that's where I heard him the most, okay? I'm driving home, and the Lord says to me, now listen carefully. He says, hey, Vince, you got a lot of clots. I said, excuse me? He said, you heard me. You got a lot of clots, Vince. He says, oh, they're not spiritual clots, Vince. But in the very same way that those spiritual clots were preventing air from getting into your wife's lower chamber and threatening her very life, your spiritual clots are preventing the wind of my spirit from blowing through your life in the way I fully intend. Now, guys, hear me, because there's not a person right now in the sound of my voice that you don't know what your clots are. You know what they are. And the question is, in the midst of this, are you going to let God deal with that? I get this picture, by the way, of God up in heaven, and looking at Vince D'Acchioli, and all the angels are standing around, and there's this big monitor on screen back there, and God's reaching down into Vince D'Acchioli's life, and he's trying to pull out the clots. What are those clots? Anger, drugs, alcohol. I mean, I did it all, man. Porn, you name it. Okay, you can see my story on our website, but I mean, he's in there and he's pulling them out, and he pulls on one, and all of a sudden a little chunk breaks off, and all the angels go, wow, almost had that one. And then all of a sudden he goes back in again, and he grabs one, and a great big chunk comes out, and the angels go, wow, did you see that? I don't know if that's the way it happens, but that's the picture I get, that God is wanting to clean us out. Listen, Oswald Chambers says, God won't do any more through you than you first allow him to do in you. And guys, let me just say this. This is a tremendous opportunity for us as believers and for us as a church. We could be going into a great awakening right now. But guys, listen, there is no way that we can experience revival without repentance. God is wanting to do stuff in us to get this crud out of us so that we can be all that we can be for him. We can become the men and women that God intended. Okay, so my encouragement to you is, this ain't real complicated. And just real quickly, let me just close with this. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon writes the entire book of Ecclesiastes, by the way, whining. I like to say it's too bad I wasn't around in Solomon's day, because I could have probably taught that guy how to be a better whiner. I'm a professional whiner. Anyway, he's whining, and he talks about, chasing after wind 9 times, all his vanity 33 times, meaningless 35 times. But at the very end of the book, and now Solomon is the wisest man. I got to be careful as an Italian. I kind of want to call him a wise guy, but that has a different connotation. Anyway, he's the wisest guy. We should listen to him. So he says, he paraphrases in the very end of Ecclesiastes 12:13. He says, now that I've done all this whining, now that I've said all this stuff, okay, get this, guys. Here's what he says. He says, and now that you've heard it all, here is the conclusion of the matter. And what does he say? He says 2 things. Fear God and obey his commands. He goes on to say, listen, this is the whole duty of man. Wow. That's it. Fear God. That doesn't mean cower in a corner or be afraid of God, guys. What that means is to be to revere God, to be in awe of God, to have an intimacy with God, to get into his presence, to know who he is, and then obey his commands. Jesus said, when you obey my commands, you're showing your love for me. Obey his commands. Get the clots out of your lives so that God's full power can flow through you, because the stakes are high, guys. He wants to use you and I. He's crazy about you. And he wants to use you and I to win a dying world. What an incredible privilege. So pray, Lord, please show me, what do you want me to process so that I can be all I can be for you? Now, I got a lot more that I can share, but I'm going to cut it off here so we'll have time to have guys ask questions. But through that whole process, I've learned what I call the secret to life, which I'm happy to share, but I want to do that if we have time a little bit later on and turn it back over to Chuck.